Okay, let's talk about tariffs. They are, without a doubt, at the very center of a massive economic debate that's happening right now. And it's shaping everything from global politics all the way down to the price of the stuff you buy every day. So in this explainer, we're going to break it all down. What tariffs are, how they really work, and what a huge new proposal could mean for all of us.
So where do we even start? Well, to understand everything that's happening today, we're actually going to go back in time to a bizarre but true story about, of all things, chicken. It's a tale from the 1960s that, believe it or not, perfectly explains the high-stakes game we're seeing play out today. All right, so picture this. It's post-World War II West Germany. The country is rebuilding, and people are getting a taste for something new: cheap American chicken. It got so popular so fast that it actually started a trade dispute that we are still feeling the effects of today. No joke.
So what's really wild here is just how fast this whole thing escalated. In 1962, American farmers were selling what would be, in today's money, about $500 million worth of chicken. European farmers felt totally threatened, so in '63, their government slapped a huge tariff on American chicken, and imports just collapsed. Well, Washington was furious, and in 1964, they hit back. But not at chicken, they hit German trucks with a 25% tax, aiming right at Volkswagen. And just like that, one industry's fight became a huge problem for another.
So, when the dust settled, who actually won this thing? Well, if you look at it, the answer is pretty simple. European farmers, they got the protection they wanted from competition, for sure. But for pretty much everyone else, consumers on both sides of the Atlantic lost out. Germans had to pay way more for chicken, and Americans suddenly had fewer and pricier options for buying a truck. It's a textbook case of how tariffs can shield one small group at the expense of everyone else.
And this is the part that is just incredible. That 25% tariff on imported trucks, a tax that was created because of a fight over frozen poultry, it is still in effect today, 60 years later. It's just a powerful reminder of how these supposedly temporary moves can become permanent, with consequences that ripple out for generations.
All right, so that whole chicken story, it perfectly sets up our next section, because the playbook is basically the same today. To really get what's going on in the current debate, we've got to be crystal clear on what a tariff actually is, and, more importantly, who really pays for it.
Okay, this is probably the single most important thing to understand about all of this. When a tariff gets put on a product from, let's say, China, the Chinese government does not pay a single penny of that tax. It's the American company importing the product that pays the tax to the American government. So many people get this backwards, and once you get that, everything else makes a lot more sense.
Let's walk through this with a real-world example, the washing machine tariffs from 2018. It's a perfect case study. So, a company like Samsung imports a washer. Right away, they have to pay this new tax, the tariff, to the US government. Now, their profit margins aren't huge, so what do? They pass that cost straight on to you, the person buying the washer. But here's the real kicker. With those imported washers now being more expensive, American brands can, and they absolutely do, raise their prices too. Why not? They've got less competition.
And the story doesn't even stop there. Researchers found something really fascinating. The price of dryers also went up, even though there was no tariff on them at all. So why did that happen? Well, it's pretty simple. People tend to buy washers and dryers as a set, so the price hike on one product just bled right over to a totally separate, untaxed product. It's a perfect example of the unintended ripple effects these policies can have.
So you might be thinking, okay, that's the theory. But this wasn't just some academic exercise. The tariffs in 2018 were a massive real-world experiment on the US economy. So let's actually look at the data and see what happened.
And this right here, this chart just lays the whole trade-off bare. On one hand, the tariffs did work in one sense. About 1,800 new manufacturing jobs were created. That's a clear plus. But because of those price hikes we just talked about, the total bill for American consumers was a whopping $1.5 billion.
And when you do the math, it gets even crazier. It means that American consumers ended up paying over $800,000 for each one of those new jobs. This is exactly why you hear so many economists say that, look, it's just a wildly expensive and inefficient way to create jobs.
Now, if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture from 2018, the tariffs on steel, aluminum, all of it, the results were, well, they were a mixed bag. On the pro side, yeah, the long decline in manufacturing jobs did kind of level off, and it definitely pushed companies to build more resilient supply chains that weren't so dependent on China. But on the con side, the overall economy actually lost jobs in industries that use steel. All those costs were passed to consumers, and in the end, it didn't really do much to change China's behavior.
Okay, so with that recent history as our guide, let's turn to what's being proposed for the future, because it goes way beyond just washing machines or steel. We are talking about a fundamental rewrite of America's entire trade policy.
You know, at its heart, the philosophy behind this is a total rejection of the way things have been done for decades. The argument is simple. For years, other countries have taken advantage of the U.S., and tariffs are the best tool to rebalance the scales and finally put American interests first.
So what's actually on the table? Well, the plan is pretty dramatic. It calls for a potential 60% tariff on everything imported from China. On top of that, a baseline 10% tariff on all goods from every other country on Earth. The stated goal is to then use all that money coming in from the tariffs to help pay for tax cuts here at home.
Okay, so the big question, what would this actually mean for your wallet? Well, according to one analysis from an independent research group, all these price increases would cost the average American household about an extra $1,700 a year.
And then there's the impact on jobs. Another study projected a potential loss of more than 684,000 American jobs, mostly from businesses having to pay higher costs and people having less money to spend. But what's really important to remember here is that these scary numbers, they don't even account for what happens next, the retaliation. Other countries would almost certainly fire back with their own tariffs on American products, which could make the economic damage even worse. So that raises this huge question, right? If all the economic models are predicting these kinds of negative results, why is this policy gaining so much traction? Well, the simple answer is that the world today looks nothing like it did 20 years ago.
You have to remember the context for all of this. Over the last couple of decades, China became the world's factory, and it often used aggressive tactics, like huge government subsidies, to sell its goods for dirt cheap. That process hollowed out manufacturing towns in the US and Europe and created a major political backlash against the whole idea of globalization. And because of that backlash, that old agreement between both parties in favor of free trade, it has completely shattered. This is not a one-sided issue anymore. The Biden administration, for example, kept most of the 2018 tariffs in place and even added new ones on things like Chinese electric vehicles. The thinking has shifted. The new consensus seems to be that maybe, just maybe, national security is more important than rock-bottom prices at the store.
And that right there is the crucial point. We've hit this inflection point where tariffs aren't just about economics anymore. They're now seen as a primary weapon in a bigger strategic competition. The argument from supporters is that, yeah, consumers might feel some pain, but that might be a necessary price to pay to stand up to a rival power and bring critical industries back home. It's a total shift in priorities.
Which leaves us with this giant unanswered question that's hanging over this whole debate. Does a strategy like this start a chaotic trade war between the US and pretty much the entire world, including our allies? Or does it successfully rally the West into a united front against China's trade practices? Honestly, nobody knows the answer.
And that brings us right back to where we started. From a silly fight over frozen chicken to a global economic showdown, the basic strategy is the same. It is a high-stakes game of chicken. And this new proposal is basically a massive bet that the other side is going to swerve first. The outcome of that game will absolutely shape the global economy for decades to come.